evening viewers and welcome to the Art with World. Today our topic of discussion is theatre in Pakistan, and to discuss this we have a very distinguished guest with us, Fizza Hasan, who runs a theatre company in Islamabad, Theatre Wale, and she has written, directed and played and performed in most of the plays produced by Theatre Wale. Welcome to our show, Fizza. How are you?
Thank you. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
We'll discuss many things about theatre in Pakistan, what is its situation, what kind of theatre is being produced here. But before that, I would like you to tell us something, how you got interested into theatre and what kind of theatre you wanted to play, and then from there we will have other discussions.
It's a little bit difficult to actually pinpoint when I became interested in theatre. Even as a child, this is something that I really enjoyed doing, not just in school but outside of school as well. I mean, one of my earliest memories of making theatre is from when I was about 11 years old, and I was living in Africa, and we lived in a community with a lot of expatriates and all kinds of people, and there were a lot of children, and I remember organizing all of them and writing and producing plays that we performed for the whole neighborhood. It was quite a feat for 11, 12-year-old people to actually do, because we collected about a good 50 people to come and watch it. They bought tickets. It was, you know.
Really?
So it's always been something I've been interested in. And then I think my very conscious interest in theatre began when I saw my first Shakespeare play. This was in Karachi. It was The Merchant of Venice. And one of the British companies was on tour at that time. People used to come here. And we watched a production, a very good production of The Merchant of Venice. And I think there was no going back after that. Throughout college also, I was very active on the theatre scene. I was at Kinnaird College, Lahore, and it's famed for its theatre.
Yeah.
So I was part of the Dramatic Society there. And then it sort of went into the background. And it was in 2004, I was working at that point with the French Cultural Centre here in Islamabad. And that was the time when a lot of people in Islamabad were staging plays. I don't know where that came from, but the trend was to pick up famous Broadway shows or famous West End shows and to recreate them here. And I remember going to one of those productions, and the then director of the French Cultural Centre had gone to see it too, and he asked me, he said, "Did you go?" I said, "Yes, I did." And he says, "Well, what did you think?" I was like, "Well, it was all right." And he says, "Can you do better than that?" And I was like, "Definitely." And he was like, "Well, why don't you?" And that was the beginning of our theatre group. It was linked very closely to the French Cultural Centre at that point. They gave us not just a venue to rehearse in, but they sponsored our productions. And we started off as a completely amateur company, and over the years we grew in terms of professionalism and skills. Now, because we were at the beginning linked to the French Cultural Centre, a lot of the time we produced French plays in translation. So not in French because we don't have a big enough public, but often in English and most of the time in Urdu. Okay. So that's where we actually started. It was some years later that we ran into some difficulties in terms of cultural funding, etc., from the French Cultural Centre, and that's when we broke away and we became an independent theatre group, and that's when we named ourselves Theatre Wale. So since then, of course, our program of activities has grown in many ways. We went through a very difficult patch because there was no funding, there was no space to work from, but eventually our work was recognized, and we got our first big grant from the US State Department, and there's been no looking back since.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, but I just wanted to know, isn't it always that you have to look somewhere else for the funding?
Oh, yes.
There has to be some market which should support you, or there should be some cultural groups which should support you, government should support you, because in many ways we have some commercial theatre in Pakistan, but the theatre which we think quality theatre and which has some meanings, artistic meanings and aesthetics, our social comment, there are not many viewers of that theatre. That's my opinion, I may be wrong. So, could you just elaborate the challenges to theatre in Pakistan, and after that what kind of traditions of theatre in Pakistan are prevalent?
Right. So I think that you've really hit the nail on the head when you talk about funding as being one of the main challenges. So I think all around the world, the theatre world has the same issues, and that is that unless you are being supported somewhere, it's very hard to run theatre companies and theatre spaces on just money that comes in from the box office. That does not happen. So we find that in most countries of the world, theatre and the arts generally are state supported to a great extent. They are sponsored by organizations, and then often they run on donations and funding from the public as well. I mean, that's the case in the United States, for example. In Pakistan, the problem with companies like ours is that there is no support, not from anywhere. So there is no such system. Where commercial sponsorships are concerned, a theatre like mine does not get sponsored because we don't attract, like you said, the kind of numbers that they want. So they want audiences in the thousands because their advertisement reaches out to that public. Our theatre reaches hundreds, but it doesn't necessarily reach the thousands. Firstly. Secondly, we are not willing to sell our theatre for advertising, in the sense that there is only so much advertising that we are willing to do for a corporate sponsorship. But for example, their logo will not be part of the stage. Their product will not be mentioned in the play. And these are things that corporate sponsors don't necessarily understand because they're looking to market. That is their primary interest. Other than that, even raising money at the box office from ticket sales is very, very difficult. How much money, if any, are people in Pakistan willing to pay for an evening of culture? Honestly, none.
Why so?
I think there is very much this trend, this way of thinking that says that culture is not something we pay for, it's something that's just given to us, you know. And do we want it anyway? So I think that this trend of any kind of intellectual activity, any kind of artistic activity has been fading recently. I mean, and I think it's not just in the theatre world, but we find that, I mean, even amongst musicians, for example, they're having a very hard time sustaining themselves to the point where future generations are not training to become musicians. So, and in Islamabad in particular, we have what we call this VIP pass culture, where everybody calls up to ask free pass. Is there a possibility of a free pass? And I mean, we make it a point to not set very high prices on our tickets because we want to have as many people as possible come in to watch what we do. We don't want to limit it to an elite. We don't want to limit it to people with a lot of money in their pockets. But even spending 500, 1,000 rupees on something that is really worth seeing, there's very few who are willing to do that. So this is in fact, I think we need to educate our public as to why they need artistic activity. I mean, I think that it answers some need inside man, which is why people do it and which is why people all over the world demand it. We don't seem to be in touch with that part of ourselves in this country, not very much, not very many of us. And secondly, we need to create a culture where people realize that the performer or the person who is creating art is somebody who also needs to live and that they need money for it. I have heard people call, people have called us up at certain points and said, well, why are you charging a ticket? It's just a sitar player that you've got on. And I say, well, yes, he has to be paid. And there was a gentleman once who turned around and actually said, what kind of artist is one who is not starving? And I really had no response at that point because I mean, what do you say to somebody like that? But that is a thought process here. So, you know.
But there was also a local tradition of not exactly theatre as we know, but storytelling, and partly it also covers many aspects of theatre, like singing Heer Warisha and
absolutely
and Mirza Sahiba, Alam Lohar and other people, Bali Jetti's theatre.
Absolutely.
So, and people used to come there and they used to listen to them all night.
Oh, absolutely.
So, is there some disconnect between our theatre practices these days which do not connect with people around, or there is some other gap? Because as far as I know, a lot of people used to come and join their theatre. They used to watch all night maybe.
Absolutely. These
And
were traditions, you know, that go back centuries. You know, these are the traditions of the subcontinent. We're talking oral narratives. We're talking, you know, literature that passes down from one generation to the next. These were often wandering troops of people who would move from one village to another, one town to another, and they would perform for a public, often sponsored by perhaps the richest person in the area, or perhaps everybody at the end of the show would contribute a little something and keep it going. And I think we find that there is a large part of our history where there is a void, where theatre in particular is concerned, because theatre was never theatre never really took off in Pakistan as an artistic trend, as a tradition. Somewhere along the way, we urbanized very, very rapidly. These traditions that you're talking about belonged to a more rural setup, to cities that were smaller, to villages, to small towns. As we moved to the cities, ways of life changed, and somehow these people, these performers, were not able to make a space for themselves within our cities. In the rural areas, I'm not sure, but I think that there are still a lot of folk artists who perform, who continue to do it. Within the cities, those traditions were left behind and no new traditions grew. Now, the only theatre traditions that we have known within the cities, or almost only traditions, are those that are copied from the West. Now, when we copy from the West, there's nothing wrong with those theatre traditions, provided we don't just imitate, provided we make them our own in some way. So it's perfectly okay to learn from traditions, to borrow from them, but what we really need to do is adapt them and make them ours, which is something that I think theatre in Pakistan has not really consciously done, not yet anyway. But I think that there are some groups that are now starting to work in that direction.
I would like to discuss government-sponsored theatre initiatives in Pakistan, but before that, just you said that you need to make them your own. Well, a piece of art, if it is someone has written, someone has staged, it has its own environment, it has own culture, it has its own meanings. So, when you say that you need to adopt them in a way that it becomes your own, so why don't you create your own theatre then?
Oh,
you may be inspired by the idea,
absolutely.
But by just making it your own, maybe you are spoiling the whole aesthetics of that play.
So when I say make it our own, it's not necessarily about adapting a script. When I say make it our own, I mean we want to pick up things that have something to say to our people, and we want to actually bring together those thoughts with some of our more indigenous practices here, perhaps. Yesterday I was watching this clip from an absolutely spectacular performance that has recently been done in a neighboring country, where Shakespeare has been interpreted in a very local context, in a very local way, and it was thrilling to watch. Why is it okay to adapt? It's okay to adapt because I think that the messages of these plays, for example, the classics that have come down through the ages, the messages have not got old. The people, the characters in those plays still have something to say to us. Why? Because any good piece of writing for the theatre is a piece of writing that makes us think about the human experience. So it doesn't matter whether it comes from Norway or from Germany or from Sri Lanka or from wherever. Theatre is about exploring the human condition. It's about exploring what makes us tick. Who are we? What are we? So we borrow from what is already great. Why not use what is already there? Adaptations of classics are perfectly allowed also. I mean, more recent plays, of course, you need permission to do anything with, but anything that is now, 100 years old, for example, is in the public domain, can be worked with. And there are a lot of groups that actually encourage you to reinterpret certain texts. For example, every 2 years in Norway, they announce what they call the Ibsen Scholarship. And the idea is to explore the works of Heinrich Ibsen in a new way. So there's a lot of thought around that, and there's a lot of encouragement of that kind of process. Writing for ourselves, why don't we write? Very good question. And it's a question that I want to put out to the public as well. I mean, one of the reasons that we fall back on adaptations is because so little is being written. Now we write for the theatre, we write original plays, but writing an original play requires many things. One, money, because a writer needs to eat too. Secondly, it's a very long process, because we first go through the writing process and then take whatever is written into production for the stage. So we're looking at the very least, a 6-month process. Again, during those 6 months, a theatre company needs to be sustained. The writers, the producers, the actors. So normally when we write under grants, or we write under some kind of collaboration. Whenever the bills are being paid, we are very happy to sit back and look at original writing. We do, of course, write smaller pieces as experimentation, etc. We keep doing that. But if we're looking at big productions with original writing involved, the budget is twice as much as it would be for an adaptation. That holds us back a lot. And then there are, writers in Pakistan are writing a lot of fantastic prose. They're writing for the television, they're writing for film, they're writing poetry. Nobody's writing for the theatre. I mean, perhaps it's because they don't see a future in writing for the theatre, because there's so few people putting it up anywhere. But I hope that that's a trend that's going to change. We at Theatre Valet are recently encouraging people to write, so we have very regular script writing workshops these days, writing for the stage. And we collect people, and some fantastic short plays have been written over the last 6 months that we're hoping to now take onto the stage.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
Regarding internationally acclaimed plays, I have seen through the list of the plays we have performed here, and few of them are fantastic, like Waiting for the Godot. I am just astonished. How did you manage to play that? It's very difficult.
It's a very difficult play.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very difficult play. We love a challenge, for one. Secondly, we choose plays that we think have something to say to our public, that are either universal in their message, and when I say message, it's not that we're not talking morals, we're talking in their themes or in their subjects.
Human condition,
the human condition, absolutely. So either those that have mass appeal that way, or those in which we can see ourselves reflected. So you will not find Theatre Valet doing the latest Broadway musical, because we could, I suppose, if we could find the singers, but we're really not willing to put people up there, have them lip sync to tracks that somebody else, that for me, that's not really art, that's imitation. So we don't do that kind of thing. What we pick up normally has relevance in some way. Relevance either on an emotional level where people are personally concerned, or on a social level. So you talked about Waiting for Godot. I think that is a play about an existential crisis. And how many of us are not going through? Aren't we all waiting for Godot at some point or the other? That was a very difficult play, and the reason for its difficulty, really, the actors are in a great deal of difficulty because nothing happens in that play.
There's not much action in the play.
There's no plot development, really. There's two people who sit there and who wait for Godot, for a good 2 hours. And for an actor, it's really challenging because one line that they say is very much like another. So reading meaning into those and giving them some kind of intention is a very difficult process. But then that's the job of director and actors together. We've picked up other plays over the years that have a lot to say. One of my favorites has been Brecht's The Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, which our group translated into Urdu and we performed, because that's a play that actually questions not just power, but how the masses allow people to come into power because they don't challenge that power at the point in time where it's possible. Lately, we also picked up, for example, a French play, Antigone.
Before that, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yes.
You talked of Brecht. So
yes.
That content is fine, that message is fine, whatever. But how about Brechtian technique? I mean, he tries to create a disconnect between theatre reality and outside reality.
He does.
So
right, it's what we call.
That's fantastic.
I would like you to. Yes, it's sometimes what we call political theatre, in fact. And the reason we call it that, and the reason Brecht chooses to do that, is because often the messages that Brecht wants to leave behind or to have impact the public are messages that are thought-provoking rather than emotional.
Yeah.
And so there's plays that will appeal to the emotional self, and then there are plays that will appeal to the intellectual self.
Yeah.
And I think that this disconnect is one that provokes intellectual thought rather than feeling. Completely opposed to that is the one I was going to talk about, Antigone, where I think, as you would say in English, the Antigone, we produced the French version, not the ancient Greek, but there it's more about the emotion that it will sort of, it has an emotional impact on the audience rather than an intellectual one. So I think these various theatre techniques exist depending on what the purpose of the writer is, depending on what the purpose of the production is. I mean, it's very possible to perform Brecht on an emotional level also. There are certain plays that lend themselves very well to that. But again, have we chosen the play for its emotional appeal, or have we chosen it for its thought? That will very, very much determine how it is produced. Is it produced in the Brechtian manner, or do we want to change the way in which we perform it?
I have the opportunity to see Antigone, the Sophocles play, part of trilogy he had written in Lahore, way back, I think 20-30 years before. And then I saw your theatre, Antigone, which has adaptation from, inspiration from the whole
Jean Anouilh's French version, which was written in the 1940s. Yes.
Somehow I was more impressed by the old classic Antigone. It had such a universal appeal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what was the difference you felt while you were staging that, and what was the process of choosing this play?
So one very obvious process of choosing the play is, if the French embassy sponsors your production, you choose a French play. But this is a play that had been in my mind for a very long time. Now, what is the difference between the original Greek Antigone and the French version of the play? In the original Greek Antigone, you have a young woman who stands up to a tyrannical ruler. I find that the French Antigone is a lot more subtle, in that it is not so clear cut as in terms of, here is a woman who is standing up to a tyrannical ruler. The stakes are not that clear, because in the French Antigone, the young girl is very much loved by that tyrannical ruler, who is a patriarch, definitely, and who is a ruler who is not completely tyrannical. There is a lot of subtlety in the depiction of the character there of the ruler, because he is an unwilling ruler. He has taken on power because there was no option for him. He does not want to be nasty to this niece of his. He has no choice. He has to set an example. So from the point of view,
power and its discontents.
Absolutely. And so that tussle between uncle and niece becomes very subtle. It becomes very nuanced. And I found that this version of the Antigone was very open to all kinds of interpretation. And the interpretation that I chose to go for as a director was a play about the patriarchy. The patriarchy in all its different senses, not necessarily always in the sense that we want to attack it, but let's understand how it works. And I think one of the beautiful nuances of the play was that it's in a very loving manner that the patriarchy often reduces women to nothing. You are beautiful, I love you very much, but I will not listen to you. What you have to say is not important. You are very important in my life, but your voice is not.
Great. So, what's the play you liked most while you were staging? You were directing.
The play I enjoyed directing most, I think it was one of our original pieces. This was under a US State Department grant that we got back in 2016, and we actually created a piece around public spaces in Pakistan. This was a time when we were in a very bad place politically and socially. This was soon after the APS attacks, and we chose to study the impact of closing public spaces on the human psyche as a society, also as individuals. So we came up with this idea that we would write what we call an ensemble play, which was written by a group of people and performed by a group of people with no main characters, no secondary characters. It's just lots of people telling their story. And we explored how public spaces had been changing in Pakistan over the last 20 years. By public spaces, we mean schools, we meant cricket stadiums, we talked about mosques, we talked about the streets, we talked about everything. And we saw how our access to public spaces and to the life that we lived together in those spaces was being curtailed by a wave of terror. We wrote a play about that. And the play, this was Zard Patton Ka Band. So first we wrote an English version that toured the United States, and then that was a more presentational piece, more about what it's like to live in Pakistan and what our public spaces look like. And then we came back and we wrote a very hard-hitting piece called Zard Patton Ka Band.
These are from Fez.
The title is taken from Fez, bilkul. And the idea was to explore who are we, where are we, in terms of this moment in time, and where are we headed. And that play, I think, was directing that play was probably the most satisfying experience of my life. It was as if you had given back something that you owed to your people and to your country. And I think that, you know, people, the reviews that people gave of that play were absolutely, you know, we were not expecting anything that amazing. And one gentleman really said it all when he said that you have contained the entire sea within a little shell, you know. So that was, as a director, that was hugely satisfying. One other project that I really enjoyed, I didn't get to direct that one, but I was part of it, was the one that we did around the partition of the subcontinent. That I gave back to my family. I think that was something that I owed them, you know, coming from a family of people who migrated at the time of partition. So.
It might have been more satisfying also because you produced it yourself.
Oh yes, there is.
You created it yourself.
It was our baby, you know. We took it from the seed of an idea into something that was a living, breathing piece of, you know, piece of theatre. I mean, we were so fortunate in that Mr. Rehman, who was at that point, you know, heading the Human Rights Commission, wrote about our piece. Great. In one of his columns, and I think that was, you know, just one of those high points of my theatre life.
Yeah, Rehman sir was very alive to everything happening in Pakistan.
He supported our work a lot.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. We'll again discuss the plays you have worked in and you have staged and directed. But before that, can we have a look or maybe your views? We were talking about state sponsorship, but there are certain initiatives taken by, I think, Punjab government, like Alhambra centers, which are providing space for the theatre. And in Karachi, Napa what do you think about, what are their contributions? And
Oh, the contributions are huge, in that they are the only existing spaces, which means that we desperately need them. NAPA in Karachi in particular is a training academy as well. I mean, we desperately need those. These are great spaces. The Alhamra, for example, even in Islamabad, the PNCA, these are the only custom-built theatre halls in the country. Every performer would love to perform on those stages. There are certain problems that go with them, though. One is the amount of red tape that you have to pass through to get to those halls. There are so many barriers to actually going there. One of them, of course, is script scrutiny. Anything that in any way might prove problematic to anybody is not acceptable. Now, art asks questions.
Yeah.
The whole point of art.
it doesn't give answers,
No,
but mainly
it does
gives-
ask questions, and
Yeah.
it provokes people to thought. If we are not going to do that, then we're not really doing what theatre should be doing. And yes, I can totally understand that there are certain things that are acceptable
Yeah.
on a social level, on a government administrative level, but I think that the level of scrutiny really needs to be scrutinized.
Okay.
I mean, let's not take it too far. That's one thing. The second thing is very hard, and that functions again around money. If you charge a ticket, there's a massive entertainment tax to pay. In the end, you take back nothing. You end up spending from your own pocket. It's not exactly conducive to making art.
So you have also organized some training for theatre
We do.
directions and acting and
We do. We train a lot, and we train using theatre in two ways. So we train for the theatre. So we are, I already talked about the script writing workshops. For example, we train actors as well. There are lots of people who are now branching off into direction, etc. So there's that. And then we use theatre to train people for life, because theatre training goes a long way in building skills, life skills, that everybody needs on a daily basis. Skills in confidence, in speaking clearly, in what your body language is communicating to people that you are talking to. So all kinds of, your people skills, your ability to read a situation, to your ability to think critically, to respond in the moment, so all these skills are useful for people across the board, whether you're working in the corporate sector, or you're a teacher, or you're a student, or you're going for a job interview somewhere, or so theatre can actually prepare you to face life with skills that help you build not just your presentation skills, but your persona, as in, how does the world look at you? So we do a lot of that also.
So what's the response of people? Are they coming to participate in training sessions?
They are, yes. I mean, we would like to see a lot more people, but there's a good response.
Okay.
Yes.
How do you view the culture of watching theatre? I mean, people who come to theatre, do they appreciate nuances and subtleties of your theatre? Or they are, my very limited experience, I have seen people responding to theatre when it's very loud, generally, whatever situation. But if it's loud, then you can get a response, you can get a clap or whatever. But there are a lot of things which in theatre, they are very subtle. And what's your take on that?
So I think we all develop a sort of reputation for doing a certain kind of theatre. And I think our audiences know what to expect when they come. So they know that if it's going to be a theatre valet production, they know they will not get that loud. So very few people will come expecting that. I mean, it might be their first time there, they may be expecting it. But if they've seen a theatre valet production before, they know that that's not going to happen. So if they're coming for something else. They're coming for something more subtle. They're coming for an experience that will stay with them in another way. So I think that audiences, we in Islamabad, we've got not a very huge, but we've got a very loyal audience.
Really?
In the sense that people who come to our plays keep coming back, because those are the people looking for the kind of work that we do, and they know that they will find something of quality when they turn up here. These are not the people you will find going to the stage shows that are so much the norm in Lahore, for example. I have nothing against those. There is, there is room in society for all kinds of entertainment that appeals to all kinds of people. I think the idea is to find your niche and to find your niche audience.
Are you talking of commercial theatre in
I'm
Lahore?
talking about the commercial theatre.
What are your
yes.
comments on that? In some ways, I'm a huge admirer of those plays as well.
absolutely.
They are wonderful actors.
They are.
And
I think
they are so witty, but there are some downside of their plays as well, which people think.
Right. So I have only one issue with that kind of entertainment. It's great entertainment. It's entertaining the masses. They go out there, they spend a few hours, they forget about their troubles, they have a good laugh, they come home. Entertainment at its best. Why not? My problem is when it's called theatre. Those are stage shows. That is not theatre. Theatre tells a story in a different way. Those shows are often improvised. It's more improvisational theatre, really, or stage shows of a sort, than traditional theatre in the sense that we understand it. My only issue with that is that when we call that theatre, then that is what the public starts expecting when they hear the word theatre. So then people expect that that is what we do also. Now that becomes a problem for people who don't know our work, because then they don't come thinking, oh, this is what they do. We don't want to go there.
Yeah.
Then what becomes really difficult is attracting women to come and work with us, because women and their families think that's the kind of atmosphere that they will get when they come to work with us, which is not at all the case. We work in a very professional, very respectful sort of atmosphere, where once the women arrive, they feel very, very much at home and they feel very comfortable working there. But the thing is that the image that develops around the word theatre is then one that is linked to just that sort of entertainment. So I think it's very important to actually clear the distinctions, clarify that there are certain distinctions in the kind of performances that happen on stage, and that is one end of the spectrum, and our kind of theatre is the other end of the spectrum. There's space for both, there's room for both.
Yeah, I understand and I agree with you totally. And I also think that what you have just said, they have taken over the image of theatre.
That's right.
As they wanted to have it. True. And just before that, you said that you have a very loyal audience.
Yes.
So is there a chance to increase and expand that loyal audience?
We certainly hope so. We get the feeling that often people have a tendency to underestimate our audiences. We sit there and we think, all right, so we're making a point here, will they actually understand it? Audiences are intelligent. Audiences have a great capacity and an ability to read between the lines, to actually get those subtle messages, because we have noticed that after our plays, people go out and they're saying the right things, they're discussing the right moments of the play, they are making the right connections. People are intelligent people. And yes, we hope that in the coming years we will be able to build from our few hundreds to a few thousands. I certainly hope so. Because I think that the fact that we have a loyal audience that keeps coming back means that we are putting something meaningful out there. And I would love to have more people benefit from what our efforts and what we're trying to do.
You have just said that the theatre, which is for entertainment, has taken over the image of the theatre, other kind of theatre. I agree with you. But what's your take on, what should theatre be meant for? What should be its functions? Like entertainment is a great purpose in itself actually, but should it be focused on some social comment, some social questions, or highlighting some conflicts in society, or just entertainment is also enough to perform theatre?
I don't think that they're mutually exclusive. I think that entertainment does not have to be meaningless, and that
entertainment itself is a great meaning actually.
Entertainment in itself definitely is a great meaning, but then entertainment always uses something as subject matter to entertain. And I think what we find is that the most social comment and the most comment on human behavior comes through comedy in theatre, not through the tragedies. So tragedy will help us explore and reflect on bigger existential questions, but when it comes to everyday human behavior and the foibles of human nature and how we function as societies, it's comedy that really hits hard and makes those comments, and we are hugely entertained in the process. So I think that what we can do is create entertainment that makes us laugh at ourselves and at others, definitely, but in a very light-hearted way will get the message across also, you know, as in let's take a look, you know, at ourselves, how much of ourselves is actually reflected in these characters we're looking at, and you know, we look at it with a more forgiving eye, and we are sympathetic and empathetic also. But that doesn't mean that we don't think about what we watch. So honestly, the best kind of entertainment, I think, is entertainment that, along with making people relax and feel good, does have something to say at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. Would you like to let us know about what are current trends in theatre in Pakistan, and what kind of subjects are being taken, what kind of techniques are being used in our theatre?
Theatre, well, there's not very much of it in Pakistan, honestly, at this point in time. We've already talked about the stage shows, and they exist, and they're very real, and they will continue to exist. But if we come to the more traditional forms of theatre here, there's a few groups across the country that are doing good, meaningful theatre, that are experimenting with writing, with adaptations, with actually training people for the stage, with putting up productions that are, I think, you know, that could compete at an international level, in the sense that they are good quality productions that are going up there. Then at the same time, there's a lot of people who are experimenting, I would say, with imitating theatre that is happening in the West. Again, like I said, there is room for all kinds of performance and entertainment, so that has its own, you know, that has its own public, that has its I think the sad thing about that kind of experimentation is that it's not a continued process. There are people, there are groups that suddenly raise their heads, they will perform one piece and then they disappear. Some of them try and make it onto the screen instead of stay with the theatre. One of the biggest problems, of course, being that you cannot in this country make a living off theatre. You can off film or off television, so a lot of people head that way. Theatre is just their way of sort of trying to find their way into that. So that's unfortunate, because if they would stick with the theatre, I think that there would be a lot more experimentation, there would be a lot more original work that would eventually ensue. So there's these different kinds of work happening, the one-off imitative pieces of, you know, musical theatre or theatre with a little more glamour, more westernized in its aspects. And then there's the kind of theatre that is perhaps using Western scripts at some point in time, but that is giving them a meaning that is very local in many ways, and that has a flavor of us in it, you know, that has a reflection of who we are as a people in it as well. So all of it is coexisting. Why not? I wish there was a lot more of all of these kinds. And I wish that, you know, we could really expand in a big way, because I think theatre, amongst all art forms, is a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful medium of expression for various reasons. We talk about literature, and theatre is the only form of literature that does not require the person at the receiving end to be literate. It's a form of literature that will reach people who cannot read and write. So that makes it extremely powerful. Theatre, for its element of storytelling, is unmatched, because a story is being told in the present moment and your audience receives it together, right? So it's a shared moment, it's a communal experience, it's not an individual experience. You read poetry, it's very personal. You read a book, it's a very personal matter. Theatre functions with, it's a crowd moment. It's a moment when hundreds of people feel and think the same way and react the same way. And there is a power and a magic to that that is unmatched by other art forms, I think.
Thank you, Fizza Hasan, for joining us in our show. It was a wonderful discussion.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you, viewers, for watching us. See you next Sunday, same time.